I'm very happy to be with you all this morning. It's just such a great pleasure to be here. I grew up on a farm in Ohio. I think I may have shared this with you before, but if I didn't, I want to tell you just a little, give you a little picture of that. It was prairie land, and there weren't many trees. It was very rich soil for crops and for growing crops. And so the trees that were there were trees that were planted. And the man who built our farm, who had our farm, built the house and planted a row of maple trees all around the house, all around the barn. And those trees, by the time I was a child, were very stately and very wonderful, those maple trees. They became really very important to me over the years. And there was a pasture where our horse grazed. And in that pasture, there were 2 giant elms, and there were 2 pear trees. The elms were too big for me to climb, but I often spent much time in the pear tree, holding its branches, having its branches hold me, sharing my joys and my sorrows with it. It was really a friend for a lonely child in the country. And I was reminded a lot of it when I saw the cover on our program today, although that tree was a little bit larger than the pear tree that I climbed and spent a lot of time with. I just want to ask, if I told you that trees could talk, would you believe me?
Yes.
Yes.
We're in Woodbury, what else can we say? If I told you that trees could listen, would you believe me?
Yes.
Well, when I was a kid, I took my books out and I sat under the maple trees and I dreamed. And again, when I was lonely, when I was afraid, when I just needed something to soothe my troubled mind, I went to these trees. And I came to love them as protectors. They really were these protectors who would take care of me. That's what I felt. I could count on them, and I was exhilarated with them. And wherever I felt that I just needed something, I went to them. So there was this spiritual connection that grew up from me with the trees. Well, when Ernie and I were first married, we lived in the Bronx. And we lived in a 6th floor apartment, and the L went by past our window. So every day we heard that roaring up and down the tracks, and there weren't many trees to appreciate in where we lived. And then we moved up to Putnam County. And Putnam is just a community a lot like this, where the trees are treasured, and there are a lot of trees there. And because it's a reservoir feeding the city water, they take care of the trees, and the landscape just doesn't get plowed down as much as it does in some other places. So there are beautiful trees there, and we were surrounded by trees when we moved in 40 years ago, and we are still surrounded by trees. And now their root structures have interwoven across and up and down and around our yard, so that we're kind of surrounded by the root structures of all of these trees. And listening to them, well, in the fall, their leaves fall inches deep, and the squirrels hop around on the oaks, the hickory nut, the acorns fall, the squirrels are throwing them around, they drop on the roof, they bounce around, they're all over the place. And so we have all of these rich things taking place, these squirrels jumping around in the trees, and then there's the cooling breezes that come in the summer when the leaves are green. It's a very soothing sound to me. It's a sound like a symphony, and sometimes I think I could sit for hours and just listen to this kind of calming sound of the leaves talking to each other and talking to me too. It's just a beautiful thing. Well, imagine my surprise when I found out that this just wasn't me, that there are others, that I found out that the Japanese have something called forest bathing. And I was just amazed at reading this book and finding out all the ways in which it's been measured that trees are really nurturing for people. It's this practice of forest bathing. The book is by Dr. Lee, who is a chairman of the Japanese Society for Forest Medicine. And it describes the concept, the Japanese concept of yugen. And yugen is this which gives you a profound sense of beauty and mystery. It's the beauty and the mystery of the universe. It's that which cannot be articulated. And it's not a surprise that when doctors measure the well-being of people who walk in the forest, they find out their blood pressure goes down, they get calmer, they become more able to think, and it's just a wonderful thing. So that's forest bathing, and that's what I've sort of been doing all my life and didn't know what it was, but I'm certainly glad to know that there are others that share that feeling. So that's one friend that I've discovered who loves trees. And another friend, metaphorically speaking, is Mary Oliver. And I'm sure that many of you know Mary Oliver, since she's, I think, somewhat considered to be the poet laureate of Unitarian Universalist, even though she's not one herself. She is the late and famous poet who lived for 40 years in Provincetown. And Ernie and I go to Cape Cod every summer, and so that's where I first discovered her book 40 years ago, her book of poetry in Provincetown, and fell in love with it then and have read her ever since and loved her poems ever since. And here's what Mary Oliver, she spent a lot of time walking in the woods, and there are woods in Cape Cod to walk in. She spent time there, and here's what she wrote about trees. It's been a poem that I've carried with me for quite some time. It was published in Thirst, in her book Thirst in 2006. It's called When I Am Among Trees. When I am among trees, especially the willows and the honey locusts, especially the beech, the oaks and the pines, they give off such hints of gladness. I would almost say they save me. And daily, I am so distant from the hope of myself, in which I have the goodness and discernment, and never hurry through the world, but walk slowly and bow often. Around me the trees stir in their leaves and call out, "Stay a while." The light flows from their branches, and they call again. "It's simple," they say, "and you too have come into the world to do this, to go easy, to be filled with light, and to shine." Mary Oliver, who wrote these most soul-touching poems, said in an interview with Krista Tippett in 2015 that one of the most important things is paying attention with feeling, with empathy. Attention is the beginning of devotion. Mary went into the woods and along the shores to find her inspiration. That's where her poetry began. Her devotion was to the creations of nature and the miracle of it, the yugen, as the Japanese describe it. that which cannot be articulated. And yet, Mary could articulate it in her poems. She had a gift for finding and expressing beauty and the spiritual impact of being with trees and nature. Well, tributes to Mary Oliver poured in back when she died in 2019, January of 2019. And there were a number of people who wrote about how she actually saved their lives. Well, whoever heard of that? Poetry saving somebody's life. But it happens. It does happen. And Billy Collins, who was with a poet who was with her at a poetry reading at one point, said that when he would be with her, people would come up clutching her books, and they would be so overcome with emotion that they couldn't speak, because that's how much her poetry affected them. Well, last year, after an illness, I had not been able to walk among my beloved trees for a while. When I was well enough to get myself outside, I wrapped in a warm coat and I walked up our road. I was yearning to be with those trees and to see what had happened to them and to be full of seeing them and really being present and not thinking about what I was going to make for dinner and not thinking about the laundry and not thinking about what taxes had to be paid or any other things, but being right there in that moment with those trees on my road. Well, I found out that the winter had done some damage, and I know there was some damage here for a lot of trees for some of you. Some were down, but there were other friends, there were other tree friends that were still standing, and I noticed that, yes, they were beginning to get buds. They were getting ready to come alive again. I came back to our driveway, and there was the pine tree. I have looked at that tree for more than 40 years, and yet that day, I was really experiencing it for the first time. Now, before I came out there, I had no idea of what kind of a pine tree it was. I know that I just felt friends with it over all those years, but I never thought, okay, what is this? And over the years, its warped shape had become somewhat distorted by there was a maple towering over it. Every year it had a bottom branch that just reached out toward the road. And every year our friendly snowman, Mike, plowed a big bunch of snow over it when he plowed out our driveway. And with that pile of snow on it, I wasn't sure it was going to survive. And every year I would look to see when the snow melted, would it bounce back? And on my walk that day, I saw it had bounced back, and it looked stronger than ever. For the first time, I did some research. I wanted to know what that tree was, because I didn't really know how to describe it. And the needles, when I analyzed the needles, told me what it was, and it is known as a two-needle pine. So the little needles gave me this clue. And the tree is a Scots pine. Now, according to Dr. Lee, who wrote The Forest Bathing, the best forest to walk in is a forest of Scots pine because of the aroma, because of how calming they are. Well, we only have one, but it's a beauty, and it is a real encourager for me. I loved the sight and the scent of that tree. I loved its resilience. I loved its ability to survive. And suddenly I realized that I had not only identified the tree, I had identified with the tree. And it had survived the snow just as I had survived my illness. Well, there it was, reaching its branches out to the passersby, greeting them, ready to dance, ready to laugh, and that's what I was ready for as well. I was so happy to be back dancing with the trees again. So I thank you, Dr. Lee, and I thank you, Mary Oliver, and I thank all of you, other friends who love trees, for telling us to pay attention, for making us be present, to look and open ourselves to devotion, to the experience of you again, that awareness of the universe that triggers in us this emotional response that's too deep and too powerful for words. I thank all of you who have shared this joint love over the years with trees, and I know many of you did the meditation that Marta led of imagining yourself as a tree, and that was great fun. We're all fellow passengers on this planet Earth. There's a Unitarian Universalist named Laura Kim Joyner. Some of you may know of her. She's involved in several different causes for Unitarian Universalism. And she, after reading Mary Oliver's poem, the one I shared with you, wrote, "I wonder if trees are the true heroes of the world. Mostly, they are in the background of sagas and fables and myths. And now and then they do rise to prominence, such as in movies like Lord of the Rings. The trees move, fight, and are on the good guy team. Deep down, I believe that there has not been a great forgetting of the peace I feel among the trees. For my subconscious knows that trees, at least for one such as me, hold up my world with hope and beauty. Let me leave these words and go hug a tree in the morning light."
This has been a presentation of
MUUS,
the Mattituck Unitarian Universalist Society,
honoring the earth and all that is.
Learn more at MUUSCT.org.
Or come by any Sunday. All are welcome.